Yeah, so good to see you, Bridge.
Like,
Bridge and I were just speaking to the audience who's watching now. We met years ago, 2017, 2018, somewhere back in Boston, and we've connected over the years on our journeying on Koh Phangan in Thailand. And I saw, Bridge, that you went to a conference titled, and this is what sparked my interest, that sparked titled Spirituality and Consciousness in the Age of AI. And this was at MIT. And I'm like,
yes.
MIT talking about spirituality? Like, I'm down. This is great. Okay. Consciousness, spirituality, AI. This is like to me, the leading edge of exploration right now. Yeah. So I'm curious, Paige, like as a speaker there and as somebody that participated, what led you there? How did you get there? What's your curiosity to take you into this space?
Yeah. So this conference, super grateful to have been involved. It was collaboration with a mentor of mine. He is just an amazing human, has founded a few companies, taken them to IPO. He is currently sort of on a spiritual journey and exploring consciousness, exploring his inner realms. And so I met him in that context. We've been working on a few things. He's a professor at Sloan at the business school, and he's invited me to sit in a few of his classes and to meet some of the speakers. And this conference is the result of sort of some of the things that were on our minds and some of the conversations that came up. This is the second conference that we put on together. We did one back in May. That was an intergenerational trauma conference. So we were exploring the patterns of intergenerational trauma. It began with South Asian trauma, which is specific to him and myself. He's from Pakistan. And then we kind of expanded it from there, right? To understand how the collective epigenetic experiences of our ancestors that are stored in our DNA are affecting our everyday experience. So we invited some incredible speakers. It was kind of a, let's say, cutting edge topic. And we invited people who are experts in genetics and biology. And then on the other side, people who are sort of seeking in the areas of understanding ancestral trauma and how it layers into our consciousness, right? So that is kind of the broader theme here, right? Is taking a sort of cutting edge or horizon topic and bringing together a diverse group of people, speakers, experts to have a meaningful discussion around it. And this one came up maybe 6 months ago, the idea of exploring spirituality, consciousness in the age of AI. And we started with some of the kind of well-known AI tech researchers at MIT to hold that end of the polarity. And then we explored inviting channelers, people who are deep into theological study, people who are much more on the spiritual side, and myself sort of as a mystic slash business person engineer who is bridging the two worlds. So overall, this past week we've spent sort of debriefing the conference and have gotten, a ton of like wonderful feedback. And what we learned is that it was actually a bit polarizing, which in my estimation is a good thing. I think it is usually not a good sign if you walk away from a forum on this topic with a tepid response. So for us to have sort of a polarized response and meaningful discussion in between was a win. So we invited our friend Manolis Kellis, who is a professor at MIT, researcher at MIT Media Lab, to kind of represent the AI and tech side. And then far on the other side, we were very grateful to welcome Bashar, who I was surprised at how many people were not familiar with him. I suppose the kind of spiritual circles can be insular. So for anybody that doesn't know, Bashar is a extraterrestrial intelligence channeled by the human Darrell Anka. And he is based out of Sedona. He's been doing this work for over 40 years, lots of videos of him online. And he is an amazing person and intelligence. So I had the opportunity to organize, to speak, and to lead a workshop at the end. For the conference, what we had in mind was meaningful discourse and discussion, but also we really wanted to bring it into the present because our thesis, in part, is that AI is here to liberate us and liberate human consciousness into higher realms of experience that are perhaps yet undiscovered. And so in bringing in that new creatorhood within our own being, we wanted to invite different types of heart-centered creative containers, right? So we had thoughtful like prompts and reflection questions. We thought it would be appropriate to offer prompts to our sort of human LLM audience. We invited a master African drummer in the middle of the day to kind of open the container into a group drumming and dance session, to kind of get in the body and get in the rhythm and be very present and in the heart, which was amazing. I'll share the video with you after, and you can just see the look of joy on people's faces. And it was so unexpected, right? A conference can typically be a very stuffy affair, and you can end up being concentrated in the head. And so it was really nice to bring it down a little bit. And then at the end of the day, my colleague Danielle and I led a heart-centered reflection workshop on how to welcome higher orders of creatorhood within our human experience. So it involved a series of prompts within a group setting. So we broke everybody up into groups of 8s, and there were like different exercises in connection, vulnerability, in sharing different types of creative expression. And yeah, I think overall the feedback was amazing. I had a handful of people tell me that this was the best conference they'd ever been to, which says a lot to me, right? And I don't think it was necessarily because we had the biggest group or the best venue or the most kind of sensational guests. I think it was because of how well curated the experience was, right? In a topic that is so like at front of mind for many people today.
It is, isn't it? When I looked at the overview of the conference bridge, I saw how balanced it felt for the mind and the body. So I can get a sense of that from just looking at the outline. Obviously, I wasn't there. I was on the other side of the world, which is why I'm here with you today, curious about it. But to me, this space between the mind and the body and knowing our connection and what the difference is to be sitting in the mind or sitting in the body or the heart, to me is the big one in the context of how we're using AI. Because AI, in some way, the way we're using it right now, at least, and this is going to evolve, no doubt, in the coming years, feels very mindy in many ways. I think there's a lot of people in the spiritual circles that like, no, AI, scary. And I'm like, AI is here. Like, this is going to be part of our evolution of human consciousness. But there is still a curiosity in me about how will AI help us feel more connected to our bodies? Because I feel like our humanness might be lost. I can feel the fear in me as I speak that. As we expand into the stars with new realms of possibility, are we going to miss our humanness? Are we going to lose our humanness? I'm curious, the exploration of that space from the conference and your opinion on that.
Yes. It's an important question, right? It's like there's a growing conversation about transhumanism. It's more than science fiction at this stage. If we look at it, we're already transcending our organic humanity just with our mobile devices, right? The extent to which it can serve as exocortex, a place for our memories, a place for, storing our ideas, our thoughts, our expressions, right? And the way that I look at it is that this is a point in which we are being asked to choose, right? Which direction our consciousness would like to go. And I believe that both paths will be available. It's not a matter of choosing whether everybody reverts to an organic path or if everybody continues on the sort of transhuman digital path, but I think it's an opportunity for us to choose individually, right? I think AI as a technology in its current state, as the LLM, is a very specific subset of our own intelligence. And one of the things that Bashar said in the conference is, somebody asked is like, uh, how can we feel safe with artificial intelligence going forward? Is it, what is the nature of artificial intelligence? And what he was saying is that there is no artificial intelligence in that sense. It's all intelligence. It is all conscious intelligence flowing from the divine source. And it just so happens that at the moment, what we are calling AI is intelligence in its raw form flowing through an artificial apparatus. So the hardware, of course, is artificial. And we define artificial as something that humans create, right? So what's interesting to think about it is that if our body is also an apparatus for intelligence to flow, and understanding that the quality of intelligence that we are seeing in AI is only a small subset of our own intellectual capacity, what we collectively define as the intellect, right? And we are in an age of humanity where we are exalting that intellect. It used to be maybe 100 years ago, that our physicality was exalted. And people weren't really, at least in the mind, perhaps a small subset of scholars were, but the average person was not pursuing higher orders of intellectual curiosity through the mind because they were sated in the day-to-day experience of physicality, in our like previously much like widely agrarian culture, especially for my ancestors. And even after that, in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, in the kind of manufacturing and, physical building of our modern world culture, where it was the physicality of the body, of vitality, of strength that was held in highest regard. And then as machines slowly began replacing us, like you can imagine if you were a farmer 100 years ago and you saw the first steam-powered tractor arrive, it may have been a bit unsettling. You may have thought to yourself, like, my entire life is structured around tending to land, raising a family, where you're incentivized to have lots of children because the children are effectively the employees on the farm, right? And if you had seen a tractor arrive that can now do the work of 100 or even 1,000 men in one day, you might be asking yourself, well, what is my value? Where does this fit into how I view my own identity? And at that time, understanding that the tractor was now going to relieve the individual of their physical requirement in society, it would allow them to open up, expand into a different level of being and consciousness that they were previously unaware of, right? Like if you took somebody from the 80s or 90s, the average person, and put them in a room with somebody from 100 years prior, the person of old would be astounded at the types of interests and hobbies and curiosities that somebody from the 90s might have, right? That they would find normal. So I think we're being asked, just as any technology has in the past, now to surrender the domain that we have explored until now, right? And to invite perhaps a deeper capacity of experience. And that can come in the form of on the digital path. If we are to become transhuman, then you can see if you're just looking at like where virtual reality is going and metaverses are going. It's kind of the path of Cypher and the Matrix, right? Like if you can simulate a reality that is everything that you would have imagined, or perhaps everything you wish you could imagine, then you could perpetually exist in a state of consciousness in that reality, right? And you are exploring it digitally, and it maybe doesn't even feel that way. And so that's one path. The one caveat I would say there is that just as in the Matrix, where Neo asked, well, or somebody asked, like, why wouldn't you just create a matrix that is a utopia? Like why would you create a matrix that is has the dark side, the shadow side that can be so cruel in certain places to humanity? If you could create anything, why would you do that? And the agents responded, or the architect responded, that that's what we did initially, but humans rejected it because we are so entrained in the binary dualistic nature of our reality that we fail to see that the only way to appreciate something good is to have it mirrored by something not so good, right? The only way to appreciate the light is to experience the darkness. Otherwise, definitionally, there is no light. So that's a caveat I would offer to somebody who might say, I prefer the blue pill and I want to live in bliss and in, some kind of transhuman virtual reality simulation, is that eventually the fundamental property of our consciousness being that it desires to expand, it will run out of pleasant things to experience and will invite in unpleasant things just by its own nature. You may not even see them coming in that way. They will arrive simply because they become interesting relative to what we are accustomed to, because novelty is the ultimate draw of inquiry, right? Of desire. Like novelty is driven or drawn, magnetized by desire, or rather desire is magnetized by novelty, right? So that's on the digital side. And then on the analog side, I feel there is, you may already be seeing a movement, as I have been, of people returning to the land, returning to an organic lifestyle, right? Who feel that there is more to explore within our human system, within the energetics and harmonies of our human system with the energies of Gaia, and of this divine creation, right? Like if we continue into a synthetic simulation, that would be our creation. We would become the creator. But in our current world, we have a universe to explore that is of divine creation. And I believe there's much more sort of meat on the bone for our meat on bone bodysuits to explore.
I love listening to your explorations, Bridge, and there's so many directions I could go in conversation with you. What's alive for me the most here is the duality aspect. It's like in my philosophy or life view, like I enter this meat suit, I come down from spirit into this borrowed meat suit from Gaia that I get to exist in, right? In some level, I'm here in this experience of sensing. And like I get to sense, because in spirit, beyond this moment, I don't get to sense. It's like it's the unique aspect of being in a human suit or a suit in physicality and duality in 3D that I get to sense. And there's something about enjoying the senses in life that feels rich and true and where my desire lies. And yet at the same time, since I was 5 years old, I was on a computer, you know? Since 12, 13, I was building websites. And so I feel as if I'm trying to balance two very different experiences of the beauty of life. And in hearing you speak, I can see like a part of me that I think is my heart, realizing that it's not my heart. The intelligence I experience within myself is the universal intelligence. It's not my heart's intelligence. It's the universal intelligence allowing itself to find its way through me that I am not holding on to or I don't want to hold on to. And that same universal intelligence comes through my heart, but it also comes through the soil of the LLMs, you know? It's the same revealing of something beyond. And that's what I'm more gently dropping into as I listen to you speak. Yeah. Would you say that, just on a definition point, the words consciousness and intelligence, um, how would you define these two words? Can consciousness exist without intelligence, or are they kind of interchangeable, the same thing?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I have a complete answer, but I can feel my way through it. This is something I've been contemplating myself quite a bit. What I've understood consciousness to be is it is the awareness that arises on the quantum level between an object and an observer. And it's through this awareness that experience and reality is created. Right? So if you imagine a model of the universe where there is one source point of everything that there is, all consciousness, and from that point, there is no experience, right? That's the 0 point, you can call it, because there is nothing outside. Everything is contained, and so there is no self or other. And in order for an experience to begin, there has to be a division of that single point from 1 to 2. That's the mathematics of it. So in order to create the first dimension, you have to go from one point that contains everything and split that into 2 points. And now that you have 2 points, you can create a line, which is the first dimension, and you have 2 equally opposite halves of that initial consciousness. And we can think of this as the foundation of the dualistic plane. You can think of it as masculine, feminine, right? And if you just think about the experience of masculine and feminine, right, in this world, of how paradoxically and maddeningly opposite the two are, and yet how interminably magnetized they are to each other. Because the only way to go from there is to merge back, right? Or at least ultimately the only way to go is to merge back. And it's through that collision that source consciousness on the fundamental level is discovering itself. It divides itself into 2. It takes on 2 new identities and forgets its former whole identity, right? So now it has 2 perspectives, 2 identities. And then through that interminable magnetism, it eventually collides and merges. And that is a beautiful and messy collision that we're all out here experiencing on a, singular fractal point that we are reporting back to source consciousness. So now the other direction to go is when the two merge, they can either return to source or they can create a third, right? And that's the other direction that I would call more towards the shadow, more towards the game, versus if you're combining and going back to source, that's returning to the light. And neither is good or bad, but you can start to see that when a masculine and feminine join in divine union in this world, more often than not, they're creating a child. And then that creates the third point, right? And makes the game more interesting, complexifies the game, and then it just keeps building down. And then through that emerges, through the three, can emerge different facets of either of those poles and of the third. And those facets you can think of as the fundamental archetypes. So for the masculine, there's king, lover, warrior, magician, father, son, grandfather, brother, right? And the feminine has their equivalents: the maiden, the queen, the priestess, the crone, right? Mother, grandmother, daughter, sister. And then through all of those characters, all of those archetypes, and then of course you have the child, which goes through their own journey of discovering either of those paths and all the nuance that's available within them, given that we are in a interwoven fabric of infinite novelty. Through all of that, the game emerges, right? You can think of them as we're adding more pieces to the chessboard. If you had a chess game with 4 squares and 2 pieces, it'd be a very simple game. But now you have the full board with all the different archetypes, and then the permutations are astronomical. And no 2 games are the same. And each game is therefore infinitely interesting because it does not exist elsewhere. So that's kind of where we find ourselves in our realm. Is the vast majority of us are exploring the game and the participants and the rules and the outcomes and the scenarios and the conditions, and we are doing so with varied experience around it, with, all the types of emotions and experiences that come with the diversity of outcomes in this Leela, in this grand drama, with all the pleasure, the pain, the joy, the suffering, the laughter, the tears, right? Everything. And all of that is meant to be interesting, right? And if not to us in the moment, then certainly to source, to whom we are reporting it. And I think what happens is, as we tire of the game, right, when our suffering has increased to the point where the ego, whose job it is to lead us further in the game, is now surrendering because it has been defeated, then we begin to return back to the light, right? We de-lever our lives. We search inward. We search God. We examine things that are sort of more in line with divine living, sacred living, right? Focus on our health, our relationships, focus on pursuits of purpose, of duty, of service. So yeah, maybe I'll pause there, but just wanted to give you an idea of how I view it.
It's a beautiful exploration. I enjoyed when you said once the ego starts, getting tired of like trudging. Well, the way I heard it was trudging through the darkness. It's like, can we just surrender now? Can we just give up now? Can we just let go now? I was like, oh, finally, I can. I'm allowed to. I'm allowed to let go and be free from the suffering, which so many of us hold on to in these. And you described it as the interwoven fabric of infinite novelty. Oh my God, there's words. And yeah, we go for the polarity, don't we? We explore the polarity. We wanna feel it all. Like, at least I can speak for me on my trip. Like, yeah, I want to sense and experience it and know it deeply and fully and completely. I'm here. Like, I'm here, right? I'm nowhere else right now. I'm here. Like, ah. So I've got another question for you here, which I want to explore. Jumping back into AI. In the short term, let's say it's coming next decade, 5 to 10 years, how do you feel, practically speaking, AI is going to change us, change us, change our on an individual level, but also our communities, our society? How is it going to change us? Because I know you said it's going to give us maybe more time, more space. It's going to open us up, right? Because we'll be less in the working. So that is already a huge shift. And how's that going to shift us? What's that going to mean for us?
Yeah, that's a deep one. How is it going to change us? Well, I think first of all, I don't think anybody knows, and I don't think anybody could know, which means that it will change us in ways. Um, as Terence McKenna says, it won't be weirder than we imagine. It will be weirder than we can imagine. It'll be beyond the capacity of our imagination. And he calls this moment. He passed in these are early 2000s, I believe, but he would call this moment. What was it? He had a name for this. It was like the interminable object at the end of time. Like he felt, even in the 90s, he felt like society was accelerating and expanding, and there was a density and a potency building, and it was accelerating towards something, right? And I feel like those changes will now be coming in months rather than years, and then it'll be weeks rather than months, and then it'll be days rather than weeks, right? I think given that the ultimate nature of life is like endless mystery, right? Mystery that cannot be fathomed. We are like being accelerated towards that property. That property is expanding and sort of will take over our experience, is what it feels like, because we've come out of a sort of dark period. The Vedics would call it Kali Yuga, the black period, where the ego rules, right? And the ego is, in the absence of light, the ego proliferates, and the ego is interested in our survival, and it is interested in what is familiar and comfortable and keeping us in that realm. So we're coming out of a period of what's familiar and comfortable, right? And I believe it's because we have tired of it. We've exhausted ourselves playing in a familiar landscape. And so we are now welcoming in, through this next iteration, this next cosmic seasonality, we are welcoming in novelty at a level that we have never experienced before. And that is to me is the fundamental property of consciousness expansion. It is expanding into infinite novelty. The way I define spirituality is there's what's known, there's what's unknown. The vast majority of reality is unknown, right? There's a very small amount that's known. And between that, there's a threshold, right? In our experience, our being. And there's unknown flowing through that threshold. You can think of it as a permeable membrane or a gate outside the kingdom. And spirituality to me is simply how we tend to that membrane. The more welcoming we are of the unknown, the more spiritual we are. And the more restrictive we are to the unknown, the more in ego we are. And neither is good or bad. You have to find your balance, right, for this lifetime. So if you have a gate around your kingdom and you've assigned a guard, you've installed a guard there to say, when somebody arrives, who's there? What do you want, right? The extent to which that guard is letting people in and embracing those incoming stimulus as opportunity for expansion versus as a threat, that is the degree of spirituality in one's experience or being. And we are being called into a sort of period of expanding spirituality as a human consciousness. So we will be called upon to welcome in lots of unknown. And it's through our own doing, actually, right? Because we have been welcoming and nurturing of technology since the Stone Age, really, right? And there's a series of technology that we have welcomed, and we've gone through our seasons of fear with it and resistance. But I don't think we've ever fully succeeded in stifling to a halt a technology that we at any point were afraid of. The last good example is perhaps nuclear, where there was a lot of fear of this sudden tremendous power that allows us to create unlimited free energy or gives one person the power to destroy the universe as we know it, right? That's this Sudarshan Chakra, the most powerful weapon in the universe. And the only thing that saved us was that we all raced to build nuclear armament. And the only thing that saved us was, even without conversation, we had a mutual will to live. So nobody pushed the button. right? Because you knew that pushing the button meant ending everything. So I think that we're being called into the same thing. The other thing I'll say about technology is that I believe that it is not something that we invent. We're not that special. I think it's something that is revealed to us by a higher order of intelligence when our consciousness is barely ready for it. So in the same way that an infant has legs that are dormant, they're waiting to be awakened and unlock, right? They're waiting to be brought online. And at some point, a child that's crawling, something awakens in their nervous system, right? Where they're like, it's time to get these legs under me. And that happens as that child's consciousness is barely ready to grasp what it means to be a biped human. Because now you have, access, you have speed, right? You have agility. And if it's used well, then you can rise to walk across rooms, walk across cities, build cities, right? And if it's not used well, then you can stumble down the stairs or into traffic, or, it can be a harmful thing. So in the same way, I think technology is something that is revealed to us when we're barely ready to grasp it as a consciousness. And it's done so in divine sequence. Each one stacks on the prior, right? Like we had, if you go all the way back to fire, managing the elements, right? Like fire was something that previously, when we were not in control of it, would just arrive spontaneously, lightning strike, and the forest is on fire, and everyone's running for their life. It could feel like a deity or a demon, and it wasn't until we were able to harness it and learn how to invoke it and learn how to extinguish it that we could use it to protect our camps and cook our food and explore the darkness. And today we have fire in our home, without a second thought, and in the engines of our cars without a second thought. Fire, hydrology, harnessing the earth through agrarian technology, harnessing the wind, right? These are all elemental in the beginning. And then that evolved. More modern technology is like all of the technologies of the industrial age, steam power, internal combustion. Following that was the atomic nuclear age, somewhere in there before that, there was electricity, where same deal. Lightning strikes were a phenomena that were to behold, and now we are able to harness that energy that powers this conversation and everything else in our lives. We had atomic and nuclear. That, I believe, was one of the last technologies that can be contained in a centralized governance system. Following that, we had the semiconductor, personal computer, the internet. Following the internet, we had mobile technology. And then we had blockchain and crypto technology, 2009. And then 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, we had AI as we know it. We've had AI in like ATMs since the 80s and 90s, machine learning, but we have kind of our modern, widely accepted LLM AI. And each of those stacks. So I've been working in crypto for some time, over 10 years. And one of the things that people say about crypto is, at least until now, they've been saying, well, what is the use case? And my sense is that it dropped in 2009 because the intelligence that is responsible for dispensing these technologies understood that it would take our consciousness 15 years to grasp, the true application and necessity requirement of this technology for us to move forward. Because we are in an age now where AI and subsequent horizon technologies have brought the ability to create great things and to destroy the cost of that down to virtually zero, right? So there is no centralized governance system anymore that can have a layer of truth and integrity that can manage these proliferating technologies and systems, right? For example, here in the US, this last election was probably the last one we'll have where you could watch a candidate on television and not wonder if it's actually them, right? But by the next presidential election, it's very likely that there will be, for every video of a presidential candidate, explaining how he's going to help our country, there's going to be 10,000 that look the same with them saying different things. And for the vast majority of people, they won't be able to tell the difference. The technology, the AI will be that good. We're almost there now. So I think that we're in a place where cryptography is going to be essential to work in deep integration with hardware, with AI, with content creation, media, right? With mobile security, data security and safety, all these things. And then that will allow us to unlock subsequent technologies like biogenetic engineering, more advanced robotics, nanotechnology, all the things we've been reading about in popular science since the 80s. Yeah, that's my view on that.
I'm I was just chatting to a friend yesterday at dinner, and I'm like, all of those movies as a kid where they had these humanoid robots, right? And pretty much all of the sci-fi movies of the last 30, 40, 50 years have had humanoid robots in them. And like, it's now becoming aware to me the speed at which Tesla and other companies are moving at. It's going to happen in our lifetime. Like, we're all going to have, most of us, many of us, are going to have humanoid robots in our home within our lifetime. Certainly, those of us at our age. It's going to be accessible, it's going to be affordable, and the price is just going to keep coming down over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And that, to me, that still blows my mind. Wow, I'm going to have humanoid robots at home. So cool. um, I liked what you were revealing in the context of technology is only given to us when we're ready, whether we're ready for it as a baby or nuclear weapons. In a way, I've heard so many stories about where nuclear weapons are stored, those silos, etc., being closed down by other forces, UFOs. There's so many first-hand experiences and reports of these places being shut down because the ripple of the power of these weapons are so vast it affects beyond just our time space, our place, right? It ripples further. So our the intelligence beyond us, the higher order intelligences that somehow we are sort of growing inside of, are there supporting us at a level. And some people, have experiences of that, which are like, wow, what's going on? But in a way, it's part of a natural, it's an intelligence order. To put it frankly, it is. The more open we can be and can see, we're given more responsibility, right?
It's a fascinating way to look at it. I think many people, this is the first time for me, even in the past few years, that I've had these deeper contemplations on technology, because the conversations around technology until now for me were not examining the nature of technology, which, by the way, I believe is the technology of nature itself. But we were fixated on the example, on the predominant example of technology in our generation, which is computing, right? So technology was synonymous with computing, right? A tech company or a tech career or tech, management or whatever it is was synonymous with computing. But I have been expanding my definition of technology as systems or methods that allow us to transmute energy from one form to another. That's all it is. And that applies to all the other technologies I named, like fire is a method of transmuting stored energy into heat and light, or on the other end, on the photosynthetic end, heat and light into stored energy. So the tree is the technologist of fire, fire, right? It's basically drawing sunlight, and through photosynthetic process, it is removing carbon from the air and creating a carbon-based tree form, which, by the way, trees don't grow out of the ground. They are rooted into the ground, but they're actually growing out of the air, right? In terms of their composition, the carbon is drawn from the air. Yes, there's water and nutrients being drawn from the ground, but we imagine them like being fed and nourished from the ground, and it's, they're materializing through thin air and light, basically. And then harvesting a tree
Huh?
and burning a log is setting a chemical process in motion where the oxygen snaps back onto the carbon to create CO2. It's drawn out of the air, and then light and heat are released, which, by the way, something I've noticed is that different trees will emit a different quality of fire depending on the light that they prefer. So here where I live, most of our fireplaces are lit by pine trees, right? Which is a dark, reddish, golden yellow sort of flame, the lower end of the light spectrum. Given that we are in the north, in the wintertime, the sun goes lower, and that's the band of light that we see. And that tree consciousness has learned to survive and thrive given that narrow band of light. When I was living in Koh Phangan and practicing my fire building and tending practice there, I was using palms from the jungle. And I was first starting with dried palms because you would assume that the dry ones are the ones you want to burn. But then I learned very quickly that the green ones will burn and they will emit a bluish green flame, the palm oil. And that's because there, closer to the equator, there's much more of that higher end of the visible spectrum of green, indigo, violet light available. So a palm tree is storing much a higher frequency of light and therefore emitting that frequency of light. So trees are light batteries effectively, and the technology is storing and then allowing us to release. So going back to my definition, really anything is, a semiconductor, which is based on silica crystal, converts electrical input to physical movement, right? The quartz crystal will beat like a heart reliably at a certain frequency, depending on how much electricity is applied to it. And then that can be used to conduct computation. And then that computation can be expanded into, all kinds of information processing, including audio, visual, and, now AI thinking, language model, generative language model process is, based on the transmutation of electricity, basically. So that has really helped me. It's all about visiting the definitions, right? We've been hearing these words: spirituality, consciousness, technology, even entrepreneurship, masculine, feminine, relating. Like, what do these words mean? I find there's so much hidden in just the word.
Yes.
And the more you explore the origins of these words, the more you can learn about the nature of our reality and what they're trying to tell us.
I want to follow a curiosity that's alive in me right now. What stood out from those words, Brij, that you shared was, we consider and feel, think, see trees coming out of the earth. Like we see trees as something coming from the earth. Like, we look in our society, we've imagined, we've pictured like it's an earth thing, right? But you so beautifully articulated that, hold on, no, it's connecting with the air, the oxygen, it's the carbon dioxide, it's interacting also here too. It also comes here. It's growing from both directions. It's growing in both directions. And that balance is a beautiful, beautiful picture for the human experience, right? Of course, the balance between the matter and the spirit, between Gaia, masculine, feminine, etc., etc. And I'm curious though about why I am, or maybe have been, leaning so much towards the matter in some perspectives here. And I look at myself as a child, just from my personal journey. I lived with motor tics for a long time, and my body used to move by itself. And I had to learn to be present with the matter. I had to learn to come down because there was so much energy in my spirit. I had to learn to find safety in the matter and come down in the safety of the matter to actually be fully grounded here. And at the same time, now I'm watching this AI journey, and it's like I'm opening up again to a whole nother aspect of and revealing of that which I am. And the timing in this particular decade as well feels like this is like in the arc of the shift and the changing of the guards and the changing of the ages. It feels like this decade for me is like the peak decade of this sort of huge shift between energetic states of this on our planet. It's like we're growing up as human, as we're stepping into adolescence. We're turning maybe into teenagers, and Gaia's also on her journey, too. And yet I live here in Ubud, in Bali, surrounded by a very spiritual community. And I can feel, as I'm listening to you, I can feel the pushback of the spiritual community, the new age spiritual community around me in the loss of the humanness in where we are speaking from here. And I'm curious what that means. Or what that is. And there's at the end of an ecstatic dance last weekend, one of the community leaders here, Ryo, he said, we're here for ancestral intelligence. We want the ancestral intelligence, not the AI. And I'm like, well, my ancestral intelligence, with love to my mother and father, was pretty fucked up. And I've spent a decade cleansing and doing my ancestral healing so that I could be free to step forward, right? And yet at the same time, there's an honoring of the ancestors that have walked before us, that have held an intelligence in our DNA that allows me and has allowed me to step into this line of life as a human being. I'm here as a human because of everybody that's walked before me. I still exist. I can exist. I have the opportunity of stepping into this experience. Yeah, I'm this space between that is and that here, and but they're the same, and there's no answers. It's an exploration. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. I'm perhaps on the other end of the spectrum in the world in that sense, right? Like I am exploring spiritual topics and bringing them to earth for people here who are perhaps less spiritually enthused, right? And I think what I've learned is that Earth is it's a dualistic plane. And, there's no denying that, right? Night, day, life, death, hot, cold, good, bad, light, dark, right? Even our bodies are, in a sense, digital, right? Like we are experiencing our experience is based on the reference to the prior experience and the expected experience, and we're measuring it in all of our senses are measuring it through this uh, these dualistic frameworks. So the thing that I have been sitting with lately or saying to people, I meet a lot of people, especially here being in a very liberal part of the country, liberal progressive part of the country. There's a lot of suffering, war, horrific things happening in our world. At the same time, there's, quite a lot of beauty to experience in our world. And what I say to people, for example, who are having such an allergic reaction to violence and war, and that those sort of expressions of the darker aspects of humanity, and they are in having that experience, they're seeking to eliminate it, right? Like they have it's so painful, it's such heartbreaking for them to even accept that this exists. How could something so horrific be something that exists, or even be allowed to exist if there is the idea of some divine intelligence, divine protector? How could they allow this? And what I've come to learn is that our dharma here as humans, as spiritual beings having a material experience, right? We chose a material experience. And what we came here to learn is that by seeing both ends, it is not, our response is not meant to be to eliminate the one we don't prefer, because what we're actually doing is placing attention on it, thereby increasing it. And the fact is, it can't be eliminated, because in order for the thing that we love to exist, there must be a polar opposite to define it. So there is no peace. A lot of people are calling for peace. And if they could have their way, it would just be peaceful everywhere all the time. But fundamentally, philosophically, that is not possible, because peace is only the space between wars. Just like silence is the space between sound. And what I invite people who are suffering in this aspect to consider is that rather than changing it, they're here for something much simpler, which is to simply choose. Right? You've seen war, you've seen violence, and you've seen peace, and you've seen harmony. Your job is just to choose which one you prefer. And in doing so, you will expand that pole, and your experience will be overwhelmed by the qualities of that pole. And if you believe that based on the karma that we build in this life, that at the end of this life, we will carry on to another realm such that our soul can continue its experience, then you want to be exposed to as much of what you like, so that your karma is built in accordance with that, and therefore you can ascend to a dimension that is hopefully higher than this one, that contains all of those qualities, right? And if you see the examples of the true peacemakers in our human history, the Nelson Mandelas, the Gandhis, the Lamas, the Buddha, they were not spending an ounce of effort to eliminate the horrific thing. In fact, they were exposing themselves to it in order to present to it a different response than what it was used to. Because
Mm.
when somebody greets violence with more violence, the violence multiplies. And that's what war is. It's multiplied violence. But someone like, from my heritage, Gandhi, who was instrumental in liberating India from colonial rule in 1947, was His book is called Satyana Prayoga, My Experiments with Truth. And he led a peaceful protest where he himself took countless beatings, right? And even Jesus teaches to turn the other cheek, right? So I feel like there's so much wisdom in this. First of all, to like just understand that if we are feeling resistant to any aspect of our reality, that to welcome perhaps that by being in resistance to it, we are expanding it, and to see if we can find a higher order of consciousness to interface with those things. And then what I'll say with regards to returning to the ancestors, that's the same, it's the same thing, right? That's the polarity there is you can either go into get more organic view of what your optimal life could be. Perhaps that's exploring ancestral ways, ancient ways. I have a deep admiration and resonance with ancient teachings and ancient ways. So there's a big part of me that is going that direction. I want to die on some beautiful land, not in a city, being hauled to the hospital in an ambulance. I want to, fall. I want to drop dead in a beautiful forest. So that's the pole that I will be exploring. I think you might find yourself in this somewhere on this spectrum too. If you find yourself engaged or entangled in both, there's a deep part of you that's being drawn towards ancestral wisdom and organic living, and there's also something that's irrefutably drawing you towards technology and content creation, or um, gaming, or whatever it is, whatever cutting edge technology you find interesting. Then consider that in that disposition, you've been selected. It's your duty to be bridging those worlds such that the others can make better decisions. That's where I find myself, right? Because I'm a technologist. I've spent my formal training in finance and business. And for the longest time, I was like, why the fuck did I do this? And then I came full circle and I'm like, now I understand. Like this was training because I was going to need this knowledge, not for its own sake, not in the way the Matrix had taught me it was valuable, but so that I could apply it to my larger worldview for the world that we are going into, and use that knowledge, integrate and express that knowledge in ways that can help others find their footing in this in an empowered, optimistic, enthusiastic, and aligned way. I don't want people to feel terrified of AI, or terrified. Fear is not a good way to move forward. Fear is an extreme motivator, but it doesn't produce results that we prefer. So I want to try to bring people out of fear into their own empowerment, to accept what they cannot change, and to embrace and take responsibility for what they can.
Beautiful words. I can relate a lot to what you were sharing then, Bridge. Thank you for those words. And in the first portion of what you were sharing there as well, you reminded me of Bashar in that he says, just follow your highest each day, every day. Just do the thing that excites you the most today.
Right.
And then the next day, just do the thing that makes you most excited, right? And the next day, just do the thing. And it doesn't matter what it is, just keep doing it and follow it through as far as you can until it feels complete at some level. Do the next thing that keeps you excited. That's all. That's the only way you have to live, because that is the coming out of the darkness, the fear, and actually opening into whatever it is that naturally this being wants to be taken towards, and to live that to the life of the highest. Yeah.
So simple.
It's so simple and we make it so complex. Like, what is this human experience? And that's the beauty too. So what's alive here is a couple of the questions actually I saw in the list of curiosities from the event itself, which I'm just curious about asking you and what the takeaways were. Will our dependence on AI erode empathy, intuition, or connection to the divine? How is that explored?
I'm very optimistic that it will actually enhance all of those things. For the reasons that I described earlier, is that we are, so much of the human bandwidth, until today has been dedicated towards making a living, which means having a function in our post-industrial society, and running our machine, which is governed by a fiat currency system, and governments whose main interest is to expand the economy from the high level based on GDP, and to use their currency system to basically issue debt and allow inflation to be a silent tax that can help them fund wars and use the military for global geopolitical influence. Right, that's kind of been the machine. And for me, I was raised in a New England town, went to basically a British standard public school, right? Which funnily, my parents, my mom having grown up in India in the East, and my dad having grown up in Kenya, where there is a large Indian population, they also went to British standard schools because those were at the time colonies. And what I realized is that true knowledge is sacred knowledge is free, and it is the only requirement for knowledge is true curiosity, right? To become a vessel for true knowledge requires curiosity and silence of the mind, silence of the projection, silence of the skeptic, silence of the resistance to truth and knowledge. And if you can elevate yourself to that state, then the knowledge will arrive through either observation of nature or contemplation or meditation. The yogis, countless stories of how they were able to discover all different kinds of specific, even applied knowledge, of how to conduct, different types of scientific processes and technology and knowledge of our cosmos and knowledge of health, knowledge of the body. All this stuff came to them through contemplation when they quieted the mind enough to allow knowledge to arrive. So then what I ask myself is, if I went to a public school system that was funded by the government, the US government, and it's the US government's responsibility to choose and which knowledge to dispense. I'm being entrained because I'm sent there at 5. I know nothing about this world. And I'm an open mind, and I have been taught that my teachers, these are people to respect and trust. What they say is true. And so that means they have tremendous power over me. And if they are responsible for curating and dispensing this knowledge, then we better believe that they're going to do so in accordance with their own agenda and goals. They are not interested in my, my full sort of novel expansion. They are interested in grooming me to become a part of a functioning member of the society that is governed by their agenda, which again is to, the two core responsibilities of the federal government are to print money, issue debt, and wage war, raise a military. So that means they're going to train me for that. And in doing so, they will curtail most of my gifts and desires and homogenize me. They'll train me up in a handful of subjects, install value systems within me to, value those over my own gifts and natural abilities. They will even shame or medicate my natural abilities to stifle them, which we see quite often. So, now that AI is coming around, everyone thought initially that it would take the low-level jobs, right? And we're seeing that it is taking jobs across the board. Not just because it's good, but because our jobs across the board are based on the same type of intelligence that we've just synthesized. Most of our jobs do not require higher order creative capacities within us. They just require us to process language at the end of the day, right? To take instructions and to complete them or to regurgitate them to others. As Terence McKenna again says, our reality is based on language. And it's the modern English language, right? Which is, you can think of as a computer administrative language. This language was custom engineered to administrate the affairs of the colonial empire, right? Where before the telephone, you had to trust that somebody, 4,000 miles away could receive a set of instructions and execute them impeccably without question, without too much creativity, right? Stable and compliant. So this language is designed, that's why it works so well for lawyers and legal documents, but it's so shitty for poetry, right? Because that's what it's designed for. It's like SQL, right? It's a database language. Versus if you want to design a beautiful modern day app, you need a different language. You need like Rust or Ruby or whatever. I'm not a programmer, but I think what's going to happen is as the LLM takes over what we have valued so much. But if you really look at it, it's such a small portion of what we are capable of because it's what we've so narrowly been entrained in. And so much of our identity has been assigned to this thing, right? And not just the identity, but how much we get paid for it. which means everything downstream from the money, all of our desires, security, sensuality. I'm just going through the chakras. Identity, love, creation, vision, all of the desires in all of those categories come downstream from money. Well, first you got to pay the bills. And in order to pay the bills, you got to learn a skill. And that skill has to be in this narrow band of intelligence, right? So, all of that is being evolved away. And with that, I don't think it's any coincidence that, Bitcoin has been around and, like cryptocurrency is going to change the way we view money as an abstraction of human value. The idea of the economy, I think, is bullshit. There is no the economy. There are economies, right? We are each an economy of one. And in the era of growth of our creative capacity, our own economies, individual economies, will flourish. I'm sure you've been seeing that in your own journey and in the ways that you have taken agency, sovereignty of creating from your unique position, from your unique experience. There is no competition. There is only one of you, right? So, again, I'm hopeful, optimistic. I view this as a truth. To me, it's undeniable. The question is, can we bring enough awareness to it such that people can feel empowered during this change and not feel sidelined and go to a place of fear and, paint themselves into a corner accordingly.
I think you're doing a beautiful job at it. The way you use language, Bridge, and the models and the concepts that you were sharing, brother, are really inspiring. And as you were speaking, there was just waves in my field. Oh, that just dissolved. That just dissolved. and this is somebody you're speaking to who's been out of like city life and matrix life for the last 10 years, right? The way you're speaking is also, just deeply reminding me parts of, wow, how indoctrinated I really was back in Britain, right? The layers of the structure of consciousness in that which I was formed into, right? It's, wow, what a trip I've been on in unraveling that over the years, and how much more there is in here, your vision of how you see AI offering another way of sort of opening us up, which is really beautiful and inspiring. And yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I feel you. I've been same indoctrination and I commend you for breaking out of it. It is fucking not easy because everything's going against you, right? Shame of the tribe. That's the first thing, like to exit that matrix, you're going to be called insane. Everyone's going to project all their fears on you, even though that's what they want. Right. So to break through that, I really commend and admire you for breaking through that, and even, it's not easy, right? That you can find yourself out of the matrix, but in a hard place. The temptation to go back is so strong. It's just the gravity to pull you back into it is so strong. So I admire you not only for escaping it, for not being warped as a result, for doing so gracefully, and for finding a place of service outside of it that is still very relevant to it. I think that's so important. I exited and they're just gone off the grid, no Facebook, nothing. You can't find them, and I'm not sure if that maybe worked for them, but to me, that's not the healthiest response. Like there is a duty, a responsibility, I think, to guide others, right?
I agree. 100% agree. And to me, that's the beauty of the reciprocal nature of energy and life moving. It's you giving and receiving. That feels fundamental for a balanced existence with each other and with the earth and with our spirit and all of it. Yeah. Yeah. So let's close up here with just one last question, like a short one. Um, After the conference that you attended and you came out of that conference, what was your takeaway? What was your biggest takeaway? That thing, that.
My biggest takeaway is, for me personally, this was so affirming for this mission of bridging the two worlds, right? I have personally lived at the intersection of these two worlds and the battles that they have fought within me, having had a very rational, skeptical side and having had a side that was deeply attuned to, the spiritual realm and So I've done so much work to reconcile them within myself. Everything you're hearing from me is my own reconciliation of, wait, it's that's cool, but it's got to make sense, landing it in the material. And so bringing together the diversity of people, we all felt as organizers and as participants, we all felt that there is something here, right? These two worlds typically like have a sort of like repel each other, right? The people in the Matrix think the spiritual people are a bunch of loser hippies, and the spiritual people think the people in the Matrix are a bunch of, like strung out, egotistical douchebags, right? And so it's so important. We're all human. We're just having different experiences, and I think it is so important to bridge the two. There is no burning down the old world. There is no complete revolution. There is an evolution, and to me, this was an affirmation of the topic of this conference, of this continued work. It felt really good.
Amen to that. Amen. Ho, I celebrate that. Yes, yes, yes. Yes to that bridge. Yes to that balance. Yeah, thank you, Bridge. Thank you for your magic, brother. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for this conversation. Yeah.
Of course, yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having